Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good to see a good number of people on the call. This is a FENG International SIG call. All hands are invited. And we have, I think Charlotte has said 26 people with us today. Thank you. We have, I normally just show a couple of slides of what this SIG is about. This gives the overall view of FENG as a global community. We've got 15 international chapters. We've got 81 chapters in the United States. We've got 42 special interest groups, of which the International SIG is one. And the International SIG has 7,149 members. And it is a meeting of this SIG that we're at today. Overall, FENG has around 40,000 members. We as an international SIG tend to get together twice a month. We have a leadership meeting, and we have a all hands meeting, normally with the guest speaker. And if you can still see this slide, which I hope you can, the little purple dots on this calendar show 4 SIG meetings. So today is March 10th, and we're having 4 SIG meetings. And we have leadership meetings the last Wednesday of every month. So 4 SIG meetings the first Wednesday of every month, and the second Wednesday of every month, and leadership meetings on the last meeting of every month. We try and meet these meetings and the guest speakers who are gracious enough to attend as international as possible. And as you can see, we've had things like adapting digital technologies, and we just had a very good speech on geopolitical issues surrounding the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, very much in vogue as a big international subject in Africa at the moment, last week. And we're delighted to welcome a fellow Brit, Simon Hudson from the UK, who has a long and distinguished career in human resources in general and as a headhunter specifically today. Thank you for joining us. Simon is the co-founder of Morphosis Partners Limited.
So John, are you starting his part, or are you still doing your intro?
No, I'm finishing up. I'm about to introduce him and ask him to start.
So let me know when I should hit record.
All right. So Simon, as I say, is the co-founder of Morphosis Partners in the UK, a very interesting website for those of you who want to look at it. And with that said, I will now hand over to Simon to give a presentation on how to achieve sustainable and professional future controlled by you personally in uncertain and changeable times. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Charlotte. So can I share screen?
You can.
And then I can move over to an introduction. There we go. Okay, so welcome everybody. Hopefully you'll be able to see in a moment's time. Here we go. Let's click the relevant button. Okay. So, So first of all, welcome. I believe from Charlotte's introduction, there are individuals here from lands afar, not quite lands so local. So welcome to you all. I'm hoping that you will find this presentation informative, topical, poignant, and most importantly, I'd be very keen for each participant or attendee to be able to at least take something away from this, even if it's 1 point per topic. Then I can probably rest easy later on this evening and believe it's been a topic and a talk delivered with a big well done. But in terms of general housekeeping, this is already being provided through FENG, so I can move further on. But if you do wish to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm more than open to said connections. And if anybody is left with questions beyond the timeline of the presentation, then by all means, we can pick up separately there. And as John has kindly said, we obviously have the website as well. So you can certainly check in to me and the business from that place as well. So Obviously, you can read the slide deck will be made available to you. I'm not really going to huge detail about who I am, other to say that I started out life for a few years in the corporate world. Then I principally moved into recruitment or headhunting, placing both interim and permanent people. Finance has been a consistent thread all the way through. And that kind of gravitated into, I suppose, mentoring, coaching, and really supporting the individual rather than the corporate business to get to where they need to get to. So really the primary difference for me more recently is that my general modus operandi is to support the exec, although as you'll all know, the exec, if they are in the right role, in the right environment, then of course those businesses get to benefit anyway. So I'll move on. And this is clearly the topic today. So how to achieve sustainability in a professional future controlled by you in uncertain and changeable times. And I'm sure we can all agree here that business plans, there's very few businesses that will have 5-year business plans that they expect to be able to align to in 5 years' time. I'm pretty sure that they are probably changing on a quarterly, if not monthly basis. So I think we can all agree we're in rather interesting times. So what are we talking about, or what am I talking about? There are 3 principal areas. One is your existing network, how to reinvigorate it, how to reposition it, and effectively, well, basically to get that network working for you more effectively. Why is it important? If I look at what I do on a day-to-day basis and I look at the success opportunities from those people I support, about 30% of the people that I support ultimately continue to get their next opportunities or assignments through people that they're already connected to within their network. But as I'll share with you, when you hit a particular level of seniority, you tend to find that the number of relevant people starts to decline. And therefore, how do you go about replenishing that in a way that you're comfortable with and clearly looks to support its intention? The second topic, which potentially is relevant to hopefully some people here, is this whole conundrum, I suppose, of transferring skills. The majority of people I can see on LinkedIn will have profiles where they may have been in retail or maybe moved to hospitality or manufacturing. So we can clearly see that people have historically and will continue to be able to transfer skills, you know, with finance into other sectors and environments. But one of the interesting things, which is why this is an interesting topic, is that we seem to be almost beholden to these adverts that say must have sector experience, must be this, must be that. And it seems to be a never-ending list of must-haves. So it kind of poses for a lot of people the question of, can I transfer skills? Is it realistic, or is it now a pipe dream? Well, the good news is you can continue to transfer skills. It's just with the way that the recruitment landscape is evolving, the way by which you look to achieve that ultimately is evolved. So therefore, if you realign to the way that that works, then clearly you can continue to achieve that. And then the final point, which I suppose has a relevance through all of the topics and all of the presentation, is that wonderful platform called LinkedIn. Love it or hate it, it's there. It currently has 700+ million people on there. And therefore the challenge is not to exist on LinkedIn. The opportunity or the need is actually to stand out on LinkedIn. So how can you do that effectively in a time efficient manner, you know, without the need to become a social marketeer or blogger? Because quite frankly, it's not something that I would be filled with joy for doing. And I'm pretty sure for the people attending this webinar, it's probably not top of your to-do or want list either. So moving on. So setting the scene then around existing networks and inner circle ties, and the problem is, if you look at this diagram and we take the initial shape, so the cone, that red circle is really a reflection of you at the start of your career. And that yellow piece above you is the bandwidth of professionals in the same professional area of expertise as you. And so essentially selection from the start of your career to the rectangle or oblong, you're effectively being assessed and appraised by fellow financial professionals. So people who understand your subject matter, your passion, and hiring on that way up is all principally based on first-hand visibility of your ability to do a task and to repeat it consistently. combined with, I like you, you've got potential. And ultimately, if you do those things correctly, you'll end up in the triangle where you're at the top of the apex. And of course, therein lies the problem, which is if you're now at the top of that triangle, as opposed to the bottom of the cone, you will see that there's a very small piece of that triangle that I've deliberately left on show. And that's effectively the available decision-making network available to you in the context of finance leadership. And certainly for those who operate at CFO level or group CFO level, let's say, who ultimately hires those people? Well, you're no longer talking to finance people selecting a CFO. You're talking to chief execs and chairmen and people of that sort of caliber. So it becomes very easy to see in this visual how networks start to thin and erode. And if you're not mindful of that, then suddenly what happens, usually in the mid-50s, without wanting to be ageist here, but what happens at that age typically is a lot of your network that have been the advocates that have carried you and supported you and followed you through have started to retire maybe, or they maybe moved into businesses where there's less ceiling height. And therefore the need is, how can you take that triangle and effectively do this so that you get to replenish the network? Okay, so hopefully that just gives you a view. So just a couple of questions really to really stir the thought processes. When was the last time that you did an audit on your existing network? You know, if I was to ask you who are your power brokers, who are your goodwill advocates, who are the ambassadors in your network, do you have a clear, precise view of saying, that's my go-to lady for that, that's my go-to guy for that, and if I'm going for opportunities that look like this, these are the people that I would go to? Because if you don't have that sort of quick reaction or clarity of thought, then ultimately these are little edges or nudges that can hinder your success opportunity. And the final question is really quite an interesting one for me, because one of the things that I often find, particularly when people are in job search or assignment search mode, is that they tend to gravitate into groups of comfort. So, for example, if you're, I don't know, a dozen finance directors and you're all looking for an opportunity, those people that may have sat as your peers or acquaintances when you were in role potentially could be your competitor candidates, depending on where they're positioned in the world. So it's also that question, which is, how do you look to utilize a network that you have? And are you absolutely aware of making sure that the network you look to procure and utilize are actually the people for the situation you're in who are most able to support you to get you to where you want to get to? Now, I say that final point because there's a HR director that I was working with quite recently who unfortunately got involved with a HR director networking group. She ended up in conversation. She basically told them 4 of the vacancies that to this little group that she was interested in. And funnily enough, 3 of those 4 vacancies dropped from her consideration, and 2 of the people in the huddle ended up winning those job offers. So it's an interesting point of observation, you know, and I think there is that expression about keeping your enemies nearer, isn't there? But anyway, we digress. So if you're going to look at your existing network, or if you're going to evolve your network, the interesting thing here really is to understand people. And what do people like to do with every experience? So setting the scene here about repositioning your network is that, let's say, as John introduced, I spent about a 10-year period as a headhunter, pure headhunter, that's all I did. There are people in my network who, if you were to reach out to them and you were to say, you know, who's Simon, what is Simon, what's your opinion of Simon? They would probably say to you, well, he's a bloody good headhunter, isn't he? Which actually doesn't really relate that closely or accurately to what I've been doing for the last 7 to 10 years. Yes, I'm utilizing that knowledge of a headhunter, but I'm not transacting as a headhunter. So therefore, the box, in inverted commas, that those people in my network have is actually inaccurate. So therefore, for those people, simply reaching out to them, let's say I needed to leave Morphosis Partners and I was looking for a new opportunity, if I just reached out to my network and said, I'm looking for a new job, can you help me, do you know of anything? all of those people who remember and know me as a headhunter are likely to say things like, well, I don't really know, or actually, why don't you talk to Corn Ferry because you were previously headhunted by the former chief exec, etc., etc. It's like, well, actually, that doesn't relate to who I am today, and more importantly, where I see myself going in the future. So you can obviously read through these boxes here, but the key question of all of those 6 is that final box there, which is, if you're looking at your network and you're thinking about getting that network to work for you, there is a requirement to reposition. And what I mean is, it starts with that thought, which is, when that person and I came to know each other, what role or place was I in, and what role or place were they in when we became known to each other? Because in all likelihood, that's a reflection of the box that they will have you in, and vice versa. So if that situation has changed, then you need to reposition your existing network. So what do I mean by that in terms of practice? The first thing you've got to do is effectively bring them up to speed. So if your intention is, I'm a finance guy and I've been in retail for 20 years when I knew that person, but now I actually want to get into private equity, for example, if you reach out to these people and say, I'm looking to get into private equity, do you know of anything? The likely response is, I don't quite get that, because my experience of you is within retail. So actually those people need to be realigned to or repositioned. So without going too much into the psychology, the way that you do that is actually straightforward. And it starts with showing interest in that person first, but you have to be selective. Not everybody, as I've put here, is relevant to where you're trying to go to next. But you start by showing interest in them. So if that is a person that you recognize as potentially being relevant, absolutely reach out to them. Hello, Bob, long time no speak. Looking at LinkedIn, we last communicated 5 years ago. I think we're long overdue a catch up. Let's arrange a call. So the whole premise of the conversation then is about showing interest in them. Not, hello, I'm looking for a job. Have you got any jobs? Let me send you my CV. You can hear that the shutters come down, the brain switches off. But if you show interest in them first, talk me through the last 5 years. What have you been doing? Wow, that's interesting. Wow, okay, so you've gone from retail to private equity. That's interesting. Okay, so you've now shown the interest, and what will happen logically and naturally is it will come to a point where they turn around to you and go, oh, hang on a minute, Bob, enough about me, what about you? And that's your cue to reposition, to realign, because as soon as they say that, you know that emotionally, intellectually, they're tuned in to be receptive to listening. And at that point, you need to be the second bit of that statement, which is be interesting. And you can go in there with the idea, well, like you, my career has evolved since we last knew each other. And it's all about reinforcing the assumptions about where you are today and where you're trying to get to. And for those that are familiar with those terms, what I'm really trying to say here is it's what's in it for them, not what's in it for me in terms of that initial approach. So hopefully that sort of conjures a thought. But the point about your existing network and not to ignore it, and I'm conscious when people get into roles that, they can put the blinkers on, it's all about delivery on the assignment or delivery in role. But the worst thing you can do is take a job on for 5 years, ignore those people, you leave a role after 5 years, and then suddenly you say, hello, Bob, got any jobs? It's not a great way of, engendering that sort of relationship or continuity. So therefore what you need, which we'll go on to, is a simple method that enables you a comfortable way really of maintaining a dialogue, because neither you nor they know what the future may hold. And particularly if we look at the last 12 months or so, which has been a sort of tsunami of change for pretty much everybody on the planet, the one thing we can certainly see is being demonstrated is that I don't think many people would have predicted that, apart from Bill Gates, who did sort of imply that we were going to suffer something like this. So with all of this that I'm going through, do please start to think about questions it raises, particular scenarios that you think relate to this, and therefore how that poses a question, and we can pick up that in the chat. But of course, to replenish the decision makers, you've got to do it with focus, and the focus starts with you first and foremost. So if you're looking to acquire new decision maker contacts, you get certain people on LinkedIn who are happy to connect to everybody. I'm sure each of you will be recipients of those types of contact requests. And I would imagine in the main part, you conveniently pass over them and ignore them. So if you put yourself in the shoes of being that person to receive them, and you just flip it and say, okay, so what would I be receptive to? And you're not going to go far wrong on that. So the first thought is, well, who needs to know about me and why? Because if you can't see it, it's going to be nigh on impossible for them to see it. And the key thing from that is it naturally follows a logical process, and LinkedIn can be a very useful ally to you in this. And if you certainly go back 10 years when LinkedIn was still quite formative, it makes life a hell of a lot easier to find out decision makers, chairmen, chief execs, and to reach out. You know, we are so fortunate to have that as a platform. So it's about this ripple effect. The easiest way to build out your decision maker network is that when you go onto LinkedIn, and I'll go onto my LinkedIn profile shortly, and if you go into your network, you know, you may have 100 connections, you may have 500, you could have 5,000. But what you tend to find is the network that kind of gravitates around you is relatively close ecosystem-wise to reflect the environments you've been in. The easiest job for most people to secure is actually a role within a similar sort of ecosystem, which is why recruiters love to try and get people into the same sector, because it's easy, it's low-hanging fruit for them, and that's why they generally fixate on same sector experience. So the ripple effect is your way of taking the same principle, and what I mean by that is if you go onto LinkedIn, you click on the filters, which I'll show you, and suddenly you can go from maybe having, I don't know, 100 people that you're connected to at chief exec level. You change a couple of filters on LinkedIn, and suddenly you may have 5,000 chief execs that you can have access to, where each and every one of them has common connections. And when you've got the common connection, you have a much easier opportunity to gain that connectivity, to gain the interaction, the opportunity to speak. And more importantly, you tend to find that on average, because your network is quite closely linked to your ecosystem of experience, you tend to find that the next ripple around it is equally relatively closely matched to that ecosystem. So for example, my second degree network, probably not the best example actually, because of being a sector agnostic headhunter, but let's say somebody who's been in HR for 20 years and it's HR within retail, most of their network will be in and around the retail ecosystem. If they then click on the second degree connectivity, you're going to find that what they will have as a dominance to that will be that additional ripple layer where there will be a slight bias towards retail and things that are related. And so that becomes your next most likely place through which you're most likely to secure an opportunity. So rippling out through the network you already have actually becomes very straightforward through LinkedIn. But there's an air of caution, which is think first about who, because the problem with LinkedIn, of course, is it creates a nice digital trail. And as I'll share with you in a moment on LinkedIn, some of those digital trails that it shows are not that positive in terms of the individual's trails that we see, and it will actively put people off approaching you, where, I can sort of show some examples of that. And then there's two questions that are posed here, which is, let's say that you're looking at HR directors because you are keen to have access to the process of a selection process into a business, or you're keen to look at chief execs or maybe chairman. They're all different people. So as I've implied here, do not go in with the same message. Think about the place they're in, think about what their concerns are. So if it's a head of talent acquisition, what is their principal role? To fill jobs in a timely manner, and ideally to do so with an eye on the commerciality, so they don't go silly on cost of hire. And those things there, I don't know many chief execs who would give a single thought to those things. You know, most chief execs I talk to say, well, if they're the right man for the job and that's the scheme we've got in place, we'll pay it. So you've got to think about what those people are thinking about. So for a chief exec, it's about the brand, it's about the share price, it's about the marketplace positioning. So are you actually looking to engender the opportunity to speak by putting yourself in their shoes and looking to articulate a message that will resonate with them? So just a question and a thought there. You know, whilst you're all clearly very competent finance professionals, if you're at the top of that triangle, a lot of the people you'll be looking to build your network with may not in fact be finance professionals, and therefore there is a need to be sensitive or more sensitive towards those types of people. So hopefully that conjures some thoughts and it will raise some questions. So on that point, I'm just going to alter off this current slide just to take you to LinkedIn, if I may, just to show you a couple of points that I was trying to highlight. So on that topic, one of the things I was saying about rippling through your existing network. So I'm just going to show you simply to give people a view of this. So let's just go to network. So this gives you a view of how you would get there. So these are all quite interesting people, you know, in terms of the existing network. But if you're looking to build out, I'm not really interested in that. What I'm actually interested in is this. So the beauty of LinkedIn, for about 500 million people, you're able to use the platform without any, you know, requirement to subscribe and, you know, impart with any hard-earned money. So I'm just going to highlight something very simple. So let's just say that I fancy building out my network with chief execs. Okay, so at first layer, I'm just going to scroll down to title and I'm just going to put in Chief Executive Officer. Okay, so within my existing network, it's not a huge number that will come up. So it comes up with 110. Not bad, you may say, not the best. But here's the interesting thing. Because of the quality of the network that I have, and I just go on to second. So what this is, these are the people that my network are connected to. So I wonder how many chief executive officers my network could give me access to. So think of 110. That's not a bad leap, is it? I'm now up to 14,000. And that's 14,000 where with every single one of them, there are common connections, okay? People in the middle. And human behavior is based on the way that we interact, the way that we exist is based on one word, which is comfort. If you don't get comfort, you view that person as high risk and there's no rapport, and it doesn't matter how great you are technically at the role, politely, you won't get hired. So let's just say I wanted to build out my network. So I'm just going to pick a random person here. He looks like that's an interesting name, Humphrey. So let's say that he's somebody that I was interested in. So I'd click on him. I'm looking for the commonality. So I've been a repeated guest speaker at INSEAD Business School. So I've got a train of introduction there. So I can go in with that as a commonality. But actually what I'd also do is I'd have a look at the two common connections and I'll go, right, in terms of Humphrey, which one of these two knows me best? So I'd be making a decision on that. And secondly, I'd be thinking, in the eyes of Humphrey, who do I instinctively believe Humphrey would view as being a bit more weighty in terms of clout? Because if I approach Humphrey, I can either go in with the standard template of LinkedIn, which is just click connect and then cross your fingers, and maybe he will accept. But actually, if you want to be seen as a CFO or FD and you're trying to create that right persona, you want to go in with a little bit of an introductory message. So that message could be, hi there, Humphrey. I note that you studied at INSEAD. I spent many a time trudging the corridors of INSEAD as an invited guest speaker. But actually, moreover, I know we've got the common contact within Gordon, in terms of Gordon, great guy. And given your profile of experience, I thought there would be merit in connecting. So what are you doing? You're pampering the ego, you're playing on the basics of human psychology in regards to showing interest in them. What I don't say in the introductory email is to say, hi, Humphrey, let's say with a headhunter hat, I'm trying to approach you for an assignment, or I want you to become a client, and therefore I'm going to send you my terms of business as a headhunter. I'm not interested in that at all at this stage. What I'm most interested in is simply this idea of being able to engage in the right way. So I've just sort of covered that bit off really just because it sits neatly within the general throw of the topic. So transferring functional skills is slightly different, and I will go back to LinkedIn on this. But the key point is here is that a lot of people will argue that transitioning skills is often deemed prohibitive because their experiences or see an opportunity. It may be fronted by a headhunter or an ISP in terms of interim service provider, and then they get the blocker. You're not good enough private equity experience, you're not good enough for this, and then you start to self-doubt and question, well, I did it before, maybe the world has changed. And then you start to get the imposter syndrome, which is actually, am I actually any good at what I do at all? And it's really not that helpful, because ultimately, to win a job offer, you've got to convey comfort, and you've got to basically do so in a way that gives the buyer, so that hiring authority, the reassurance and comfort to say, well, if I'm going to give you the baton to be the CFO in my company, I've got to be able to see you through the whites of your eyes and absolutely trust that you're going to protect my business, protect my welfare, protect my strategy. And therefore, all of that consideration is based on minimum risk, highest sense of comfort. And so, but the reality is, as I put here with fact, which is, you know, there have been some absolute winners sector-wise in the last year or so. And this is no different. There's always been winners and losers as far as businesses are concerned and sectors are concerned. So the natural progression, if you want to be that go-to CFO and you want to have that top of the table reputation, or as somebody coined to me not so long ago, you know, to sort of be the Matt Damon of your marketplace, or, you know, whoever else is sort of highly rated as an actor, but within the realm of finance, that the reality is that you've got to be able to morph, or you've got to be able to evolve. But how do you do it? Okay, so let's talk about this. Okay. So I mentioned the word comfort, and for those people who have enjoyed, you know, sort of working with me through Morphosis Partners, that is probably, it's probably the key word that I overemphasize and stress. It's all about comfort and alignment. And, you know, the idea here of progression is to say, well, if you're going to transfer skills and you're going, say, from retail to private equity, or private equity to venture capital, or any other variation that you may consider, then ultimately, whatever that contrast is, as far as the hiring, buying community is concerned, whether it be the gatekeeping headhunter, whether it be the head of HR or the talent acquisition person, or indeed the chief exec, or actually, if you're at CFO level, probably the non-execs as well, that you've got to be able to take that contrast and articulate the contrast as comfort, as opportunity, not as risk. And the majority of people that I talk to, and I chat to them about their interview technique or cover letters or things of that nature, all I hear is risk, because they over-egg the jargon of the sector that they're being in, which is, right, you're a piece of rock, cut you in half, you're going to open up and it'll say retail. So if I was a manufacturing company, why would I hire you? Where's the alignment? So it's about looking at the situation. The situation is your best friend. If you want to transfer skills, forget the product or service to align. The way to align is through situation alignment. And what I mean by that is, look at the clues of what's going on within that business. Is it in growth phase? Is it basically just plateaued and it needs a way of trying to, I don't know, reignite and re-energize the engine? Okay, so that's restructuring probably. It may be acquisitions. Or is it that unfortunately they've lost the way a little bit and they need some triage and turnaround actions? So the point is, businesses, as far as I'm concerned, are intrinsically simple. People complicate it. So you've got to get the comfort through the person ultimately in order to get the opportunity to deliver the role. So when you think about transferring skills and you think about the situation, so let's say you see an advert, and let's say that the sector is different, but you can relate to the situation. So let's say that you've got a background where environments you've been in have been, I don't know, growth-based, and you see in the advert that it may be a different sector, but you know they're talking about growth. So there's a synergy around that, there's a commonality. The second thing you need to think about is to say, okay, so the situation I can handle, is the scale there? Right. So I've been used to, I don't know, 200 million turnover plus firms. This one's at 2 million, it's a startup. Right. So there's a bit of a contrast here in scale. So how do I present in a way that is comfortable for them, as opposed to, whoa, my friend, you're too big for us and you won't stay? Because I would imagine for a lot of more senior finance professionals, certainly from my experience, that actually part of the draw to transfer is around going from maybe the PLC type or listed company environment to that could be maybe smaller and owner managed or high growth VC backed. So there's absolutely contrast. And we know that people can transfer because actually we see it all the time in the news. But the key rule here, rule 3, is that if your approach to that is simply to click apply and you become one of 100, where the modus operandi of the ATS and the algorithm and the smoke and mirrors that surrounds that, which is letting lots of people sell CV writing services at the moment for a killing, which is actually pretty futile, because the reality is that what happens is that ultimately, if you can't then articulate the contrast as comfort, you're just simply delaying the point at which you get rejected. So you actually need to think about transferring skills much earlier in the process. And so if I was to see with one of my clients, the fact that there was an opportunity in a different sector, if we thought that the advert made sense, my questions would be, are you connected to anybody within that business? Are there any second degree connections, commonality, when you look at the decision makers in that company where you could leverage to fuel advocacy? Let's have a look at the big ticket impact that you've made. And rather than go in with the intimidating headlines of I managed $1 billion turnover business in 20 different locations, can we break that down into a series of local cogs and projects so that actually the scale of what you describe and articulate, that little component sits quite neatly as a relevance in scale around kind of what they're trying to do? And how well aligned and focused are you at being able to do that? So the key thing here is what I'm trying to articulate to transfer skills is that those who do it well are those who are able. They're probably no different to you in terms of the functional skills that are required. You know, they will be qualified finance professionals. So actually what's different about that person as opposed to the person who can't transfer skills so successfully? It's all about the way that you align your network to support your application process and in order to fuel that comfort. Because if you can't do that, hiring's based on comfort, and most hiring people play safe. So that's generally the way that they go. So the general roadmap here, which I've articulated here, is you need an active forward network. If you're going to breach that gap of discomfort and you really want to project yourself successfully, think about where you want to go. A bit like a business plan, you know, you have that forward forecast. So that's my intention, right? Okay, so if that's where I want to end up, I need a network that I need to reposition and align to support that. Tactically on LinkedIn, maybe I can start following some of the companies in that space and maybe some of the groups in those environments, so that to the passive observer who stumbles upon the profile, I can look more relevant and therefore it fuels a sense of comfort. I could even, for example, if I'm trying to get into private equity and maybe it's my first gig into private equity, maybe I can start to find content that private equity companies have put together. I can start to share it so that my digital trail on LinkedIn, for example, or if I'm an interim person and I've got my own website, I can put things like that on there so that it starts to create this ecosystem, i.e. your brand, that basically looks relevant to support where you're trying to go. And the interesting thing is you then need to audit your CV, your LinkedIn profile, and think, how much of a stick of rock am I, in terms of that jargon that I've acquired that may be particular and pertinent to retail, but actually doesn't really exist in financial services. And granted, there will be certain roles that may be prohibitive to you because they will say you must be FCA this or whatever regulation this, but there are plenty of opportunities of sectors where you can easily look to migrate if you so wish. And the important thing towards the end there about informational meetings, even if you think there's a job that you think, I really want to do that, it satisfies where I'm trying to go. Yes, it's a change of sector, but it's where I want to go. I would urge you not to click apply because, LinkedIn will show you how many other people have seen it, how many other people have applied. If you've seen the advert through Gap Web, where every accountant will be going if they're open to looking for a new opportunity, then, you're competing against lots of other people and you only need 3 or 4 of them to go, well, I've got that sector experience that the headhunter or the talent acquisition person stumbles upon. And the shortlist based on comfort is already there. So you've got to think about using the vacancy as the trigger for the timing to approach a business. But rather than do that, why don't you approach the chairman or the chief exec and say, hello, Bob, interesting business. I read the announcements, your 4-point increase in share price or your recent acquisition of this, exciting times. And actually that to me would make sense in terms of the coincidence of the fact that you appear to be, looking to add to your leadership team. And that is what's prompting me to approach or to reach out to you. I thought we could connect from the vantage point of shared insight, maybe the opportunity to collaborate. And so the premise is, I'm not applying for the job yet until we've had a conversation. We get the rapport, we get the comfort, we get the alignment. And then you turn around to me and say, my word, Simon, we're talking a similar language. And when that person says that actually our intention is growth, and you then say, well, actually, I've spent 20 years growing businesses through the same kind of situation that you're talking about, you bring it to life. You're no longer aligning yourself to a pre-written job spec that was probably written years before, probably by the HR function, not by the hiring manager. And so you get a much more accurate view. And at your level, CFOs, FDs, etc., that relationship, that trust between the chief exec and indeed the chairman is absolute central and key. So rather than click apply and do it in the wrong order and hope to get through these hoops of deselection, go to the chairman or the chief exec using the advert as the primer. And if you align and you get on and it makes sense, then mutually you'll get to a point of saying, well, actually, that role really looks quite interesting. And actually, I'm glad I've had the conversation. So now I don't feel I'll be wasting my time in applying. So how do we go about this? And if that person says, well, actually, I've instructed, I don't know, Mark Satin or Walker Hamill or whoever, and you can say, well, great, who's the consultant managing that opportunity? Do you mind if I reference our conversation when I reach out to them? Because having been a headhunter, if I was approached by somebody who said, the person who's hired you, Simon, has basically said that they would be interested in seeing my application, what do you think I'm going to do with that person's CV? They've pretty much guaranteed a place on the shortlist because my client is actually not the candidate as a headhunter. As a headhunter, the client is the company. And slightly different with Morphosis partners, of course, but the principle is there, which is you've got to look at who you're aligning to and what can you do to really articulate that comfort. And once you've got that person on side, the rest of it, it's not a guarantee to a job offer. You've still got to go through the benchmarking or whatever else, but your chances are so much higher. And, you know, that type of method that I've put here, if you can apply it and apply it well, you will be able to evolve your career journey in keeping with your own aspirations. Because to me, there's nothing more boring than going into a company and another company and another company, repeating things that may be right for them, but actually at some point you want your own invigoration, you want your own engagement. So hopefully that's useful on that point. And then the final point, actually, which I'm going to use LinkedIn for because of trying to get this across, is that when you are looking at these companies in different sectors and you're thinking about reaching out, because I've referenced, say, a chairman or a chief exec, and it may not end there, there could be other people that you may want to reach into first, is that you've then got this idea of saying, well, who's most likely to get me? And if you're going from, say, retail, and let's say you've been to hospitality and now you're looking at a move to manufacturing, you've effectively had a non-linear career. Okay, so you've not just sat in the silo all the way through. So when you're looking at a different sector, and let's say that happens to manufacturing and you've got a business in mind that you're keen to look at, do not reach out to the person who within that sector has a linear career. So there could be the chief exec who may have spent 25 years in manufacturing, literally family business, went in as the, I don't want to use the word nepotism, but I've just said it, but let's say they're in a privileged position at the start of the journey, 15 years later, they're the chief exec, whatever. They know no different. So when you try and say to this person, hello, I'm coming from retail and hospitality, but I thought I could be, you know, the most comfortable hire for you as CFO, you've got a hard sales job. But let's just say that the HR director, as an example, has basically been in not necessarily retail and hospitality, but, you know, that's another corporate role or function that is quite good at transferring skills. So let's say they've been in technology businesses and whatever, but the point is they are now non-linear. That would be the person that you'd look to reach out to, because when you engage rapport and you align and you go back a few slides where it's what's in it for them, or you show with the interest in them, and you reach out to them. So, well, the reason for reaching out to you is simply because you are testament to the value of a professional's ability to transfer skills and to transfer that innovation, you know, in an energized way that delivers additional impact to the business. They're going to get it. So that should be your starting point, and then you use that person really to become your advocate internally in order to leverage you further into the process. So I'll show how you can find that on LinkedIn shortly, but we'll move on to LinkedIn here. So LinkedIn, as I mentioned before, there's quite a few people on there, and therein lies the problem. How do you stand out amongst 711 million others? And more importantly, how well do you actually understand what the modus operandi of LinkedIn is? Because if you don't understand that, you're not necessarily going to get the best from it. Or what you do run the risk of, which lots of people on LinkedIn run the risk of, is they become busy fools on LinkedIn and they end up basically distracting from the persona that they're trying to create. So if you want to sit, for example, as a chief exec wannabe or a CFO wannabe for, a high growth fintech business, make sure that your digital trail on LinkedIn ultimately fully supports that intention. And, there's plenty of people on LinkedIn, I'm sure you can see, but just when I show you where to go looking at these digital footprints of people, just have a look and think, does that footprint, is that really going to align well and credibly to the brand or persona that you're trying to create, and get the chairman or the chief exec on side or the headhunter on side? And will it draw their attention in a way that positions me as the preferred choice for that approach? Because there's an awful lot of noise on LinkedIn, and there's an awful lot of people who are treating LinkedIn like Instagram or Facebook. And whilst I don't denigrate that, those things, if you want to stand out for the purpose of being able to elevate your reputation, more importantly, to maintain that reputation, then, you know, to me, one of the things that defines a leader is the fact that they don't succumb to herd-like behaviours. To me, that's one of the principal differences. And so if you really want to behave in a herd-like way, then don't be surprised if those true leadership roles don't become available to you. So, but it takes bravery to stand out. So how do you do that? And little lead in here, do you know your SSI score, and beware the digital trail? So there's a wonderful thing on LinkedIn, which basically, it's a bit like getting under the bonnet of LinkedIn, and it's known as a social selling index. Now, it's principally marketed by LinkedIn to wannabe salespeople or marketeers who want to be able to efficiently build brands. So if we look at what the 4 components are of the SSI, establishing your brand, finding the right people, engaging with insights, building relationships. Now, whilst a salesperson or a marketeer could relate to this, if you're thinking about building your brand as a finance professional, or you're trying to build a network towards career sustainability, well, if you're going to do that, then arguably these quadrants remain relevant to you as well. And the key thing to remember here, which is why I'm not focused on CVs, is that a CV will only really go to somebody today that isn't known to you on the back of a conversation with a headhunter, which usually is on the back of applying for something, and therefore it's requested. With LinkedIn, of course, there's no such politeness. You know, whatever you put on LinkedIn is there. The world can see it. It's available 24/7, 365 days a year. And therefore, most people's first awareness of you or introduction to you that today you're not known by will probably be through LinkedIn, which is why it gets the emphasis. So is it a gimmick, or is it actually secret sauce? So what do we mean by this? Well, if you're going to establish your brand, what does that really mean? Well, this is the definition that they provide. So a profile with the customer in mind. So what does that mean? Well, when you look at your LinkedIn profile and the way that you articulate what you do and how you do it, do you sound like a finance professional in terms of very heavy finance jargon, or maybe for a marketeer, very much tied in the jargon of a marketeer? Or actually, do you think about the customer and the situations that you can support and how you're really able to assist and help? And what I mean by that is people generally operate with pictures much better than they do with words. So with LinkedIn, what that means is you need to use words that enable the reader to paint a picture. So let me give you an example. If I was to read a typical finance profile on LinkedIn that says, finance director, 25 years experience, ACA qualified, 15 years in corporate career, then went mid-market, SMEs, whatever. It's like, so where's the standing out? Where's the differentiation here? And how does that really paint a picture to an intended audience like a chief exec or maybe a partner in a private equity firm? So you've got to think about the customer, that audience in mind, and say, how does my language and the way that I'm articulating myself speak to them? Okay. And if you do that well, you will start to draw more attention. And as I'll show you on LinkedIn with skills and endorsements, you can help to generate and drag more traffic to you. The second thing, of course, that LinkedIn scores is how well are you at finding the right people? So what does that mean? It means if you are trigger happy with your connections and just accept anybody and everybody without any rhyme or reason, LinkedIn doesn't like it, even to the point that they will put a block on your account and even blacklist you if you're a repeat offender. But what they do reward is the fact that you are considered about, well, actually, who am I? Who is relevant? And what they're actually scoring is that conversion rate between hello, let's connect, and the percentile of those that choose to. So that's what they're rewarding there. Then you've got the engagement piece, and this is where some people get distracted with LinkedIn, which is, oh, it's all about content. I've got to create stuff. Yes and no. Share stuff, yes. Create stuff that supports the persona you wish to articulate. But don't get distracted by all the noise of, dare I say it, the herd community. For example, I don't engage with Instagram. I can't be bothered with Facebook. And yet there's 800 million people on Facebook that love it and sit there for hours on end. It doesn't mean that they're wrong and I'm right. It's just for the purpose of how I wish to be seen. That's my preferred behavior. And then the final point here is about build. So this is the most important score you can have on LinkedIn, which is about, you know, do you actually harbor the trust from within your network? And the way they score that is about the fact that your connections then choose to engage with you when sought upon. So if you connect to 100 people and you're then not communicating with them, you're not really building relationships. So again, they actively promote a score that does that. So if you're all curious, unfortunately, I'm not at 100. So clearly there's work in progress. But the interesting thing for me is if you look at the important one of build relationships, it scored out of 25 and I'm at 25. And that to me is the one that I focus on. So it's about the quality and the precision, whereas the one above, engagement, sits kind of in the middle. It's a mediocre score. Part of that is because I spend time on, you know, supporting the clients I support to do correct engagement at my detriment, let's say, in terms of time on LinkedIn. But for me, the most important thing is the way that I nurture the people that I am known to. And then what it also does is it gives you a bit of a rating based on you relative to other people who are labeled the same as you. So you'll see at the bottom left that it says that for people who are similar to me, they score an average of 26 and I'm at 76. So what does that do in terms of the perception of my brand? I'm much more elevated. And yet the one thing that you won't see on LinkedIn is me all over the place shouting at the top of a mountain with a megaphone. I have no interest in that. And yet most of the people who are in my related industries, and I won't mention names, they're quite busy shouting from the mountaintop. So they may have lots of followers, but their engagement around building relationships is not great at all. So I'm quite happy that I'm put in the top 1%. And then to the right of that, it talks about, you know, within your network. And that is an important thing to do. So it says the average person in my network is 49 as a score. And what that says is that it means that the quality of the people I'm connecting to are within the realms of their brand, the realms of their reputation, are doing a pretty good job in terms of the way that their persona sits on LinkedIn. And it actually gives you a circle there just to reflect where that score sits. And what you'll see about the average of the 49 out of 100 is that the people I choose to connect to are similar to me. The smallest segment score in that area is the engaging with insights. Why? Because for me, true senior people don't need to shout about their ego. What they actually do is they get on with the job. And those are the kinds of people that I'm more interested in connecting to. So the key point here is you don't have to shout loud in terms of getting LinkedIn to work for you. So what does that mean in practice? If you're curious to find out your own score, then there's the link there that you'll have where you can just make a quick note of it. But the interesting thing is I delivered a webinar, well, actually it's a seminar series I'm running at the moment, and I introduced them to this, and one of the chaps came back to me and said, haha, I beat you. His SSI was, I think, 89. And it's interesting because why was that person on the seminar? Because interesting enough, he's not been in a job for a while, and he's struggling. But his SSI score is really quite high. But the interesting thing is, where is it high? It's high in the engaging with content and making lots of noise. And the issue with that is, as I said to him, I said, but I'm now losing sight of how you wish to be seen. So let me sort of show you what I mean, just to sort of finish the topic, if that's okay. And then I think we're near the close of the presentation. So what do I mean by this? So let me show you. I don't really want to name names or expose anybody specifically, but let's just, for argument's sake, take my profile. Just very quickly. Okay, so on my header profile, I've got a couple of things that are featured. For some reason, the images are, I think there's a poor internet connection, so the images aren't coming up. But basically, all I've got featured are two things that effectively support how I'm wishing to be seen or the persona I wish to create. So one of them here is about CVs. The amount of time that executives waste on rejig of a CV, blaming the CV. Now, yes, there are some horrendous CVs out there, but in the main, they're pretty bloody good. You know, and when you're up against 100 or 200 other people that are applying, then actually it's fairly easy to reconcile why you've maybe not got through to a shortlist. But equally, you know, if you've had a conversation with a headhunter and you've not got to interview, is that actually the CV that's at fault? Or is it probably the way that you didn't articulate the value of your offer and the alignment to the job as well as somebody else? That's option 2. But usually what the case is with these headhunters is that they generally prioritize people that they placed before, people that can win an interview, and other things like that. So there's a whole sort of gray area of influence around who ultimately gets hired, who ultimately gets on onto shortlist. But the whole general consideration is about least risk, highest comfort. And for the more senior people, it shouldn't really be a distraction about the CV. Unless you're James Bond, where everybody knows who you are, fictitious character, of course, what you should be focusing your time on is actually where the priority of jobs get filled. And the interesting thing on this ranking, which came through APSCO, by the way, is that LinkedIn was down in 8th as a source for executive jobs, which is why the majority of jobs you see on LinkedIn generally peter out on a salary of about £120,000 in the UK, maybe 130. I rarely see an advert on LinkedIn, particularly in the UK or anywhere else, that would pay, say, 200, 300 or whatever. And yet those jobs exist and those jobs are being filled. So you have to align yourself and you have to sort of think about, when I last job searched, what was my behavior that reflected the level I was at? And if you've kind of grown and gravitated to a more senior level, then the nuances of the way that particular marketplace works evolves. And so ultimately you have to align to be in sync with that. And then the final point in terms of digital trail, and you can have a look at your own digital trail, but basically any headhunter, head of talent will go straight to what you've done. They will have a look at your activity and they can easily form an opinion about your personality. So make sure that this track in particular offers a support to your brand. Why? Because the CIPD, which is the HR professional body, they rescind around 29% of offers from interview because of inconsistencies created by their digital trail at senior level. So it's a high number and it's a growing percentage. So make sure that your CV, your LinkedIn profile, and all those other bits align readily. And so that's really, I think, all I want to say in terms of moving forward. And I think, sorry, we're about there. So if I just take you to the last slide. Thank you very much. So I know it's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour through, but hopefully that's been of benefit and people have got some insight at least to take away from what I've gone through today.
Thank you, Simon. Questions for Simon? Any questions at all?
Well,
Well,
can I ask one question?
Of course.
Okay. Well, Simon, thank you so much for a very, very nice presentation. My question is, LinkedIn, well, when you approach somebody on LinkedIn, you have only a certain number of characters to put in your first message. And obviously, very often you how your invitation to connect fits into the person, into your target person's profile. So what's your advice on how would you handle this?
So just because of the interference, was the question that because you're limited on the number of characters on a connect request, how would you look to approach that because you're limited to the word count. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, you're basically saying that you cannot just say, please get me connected to your professional network. You have to explain the reason you have behind joining the network. Now,
Yeah,
if you're limited, how would you do that?
Okay, no, fair question. I mean, for those who aren't necessarily wanting to subscribe to InMails, which clearly come at a cost or subscription cost, I would also say to you that if your intended audience is a relatively senior person, you know, they're busy people, probably got their own networks, and they're not sat there thinking, I've got, I didn't quite get your name there, but, you know, I'm sat here waiting for you to email me in a moment because you want to connect to me. So they don't have that foresight. So in terms of the messaging, going in there with war and peace and an extended argument of how wonderful you are and what the world looks like, etc., is not really, because it's not being requested. Actually, I would say to you that less is more. So in the context of connect plus note, you kind of develop a smartness around this, and it takes a bit of experience, but the kind of lingo I've generally gravitated to is hello, Bob. I don't know who this Bob is, by the way, but it's a name I keep referring to. Hello, Bob. You know, I'm actively looking to further develop my executive peer network of C-suite colleagues operating in X industry, and your profile piqued my interest. I'd welcome connecting, and depending on the word count you've got left, I usually iterate with something like, I'd welcome connecting for the purpose of market insight, exchange, or if you think it's a business where they're going through changes, or you've got an instinct or an inkling to think that there's a relatively close alignment potentially, or there could be an opportunity, then I would change the shared market insight for the term, for the opportunity of potential future collaboration and shared opportunity. And then you just simply end it with your name. But equally, if you want to save a couple of characters, because of LinkedIn, it's going absolutely from your profile to their profile. If you need a couple of characters back, you don't need to say, you know, I don't necessarily need to end that message Simon, because clearly it's coming with a header that says Simon Hudson, and then a notification, it will say Simon Hudson, you know, sort of network request or what have you. So that's generally what to do. But the other thing around messaging is, the other way of getting around it to accelerate or increase engagement is to look at their digital trail of activity. And if they are typically quiet on LinkedIn, then you may find that connect request will ultimately be greeted with silence. And what I generally say to those people, if you find that that's the case for you, have a look at Twitter, because I tend to find that people who are quiet on LinkedIn are usually quite noisy on Twitter and vice versa. So you could try that. And the other thought, of course, on LinkedIn is if that you find that there is a reasonable digital trail, look for content that's not too historic that they may have mentioned or talked about, and offer a comment. You know, it could be great results, looking forward to your, you know, 2021/22 results, you know, or whatever. So that you start to align to their business in a way that fuels a sense of awareness, so that when you do look to reach out to them, you can offer them the short message, and they're more likely to accept because you've fueled a sense of alignment.
Simon, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You know, when you talk about noise and about kind of like people who are prolific posters on LinkedIn.
Yes.
I've heard one person say that the people who are more active on LinkedIn and post more frequently, if someone is doing a search, they will come higher up in the search engine of LinkedIn because they are more frequent at posting things. Would you agree with that, or because what you seem to be suggesting is slightly contrary to that, from if I understood you correctly?
Okay, so let me just show you what, hopefully you can still see my screen, but let me just show you ultimately what a head of talent acquisition, or, you know, for example, the origination people within private equity, Sorry, let me just get to the right page. What they actually use in order to get to people like you, as in just a professional that may be of relevance to them. So let me just show you something here. Because the interesting thing is there's a lot of misinformation, smoke and mirrors, misdirection. And ultimately, I always question that insight that you've got. I would always think, right, who's the author of that? Where's it come from? And what is their agenda? Because the interesting thing for me is that's just not accurate. So let me just show you on here, for example. So this is a tool that basically, a half decent search firm would be using. So let me just go on to all filters. Okay, so what this basically does is if I wanted to get you for argument's sake, so let's see if we can find you, okay? So can I just ask what part of the world are you in?
London.
Okay, great, that's helpful, okay. So we'll just put London. Let's put England in just in case we can't find you, so let's hedge our bets. Okay, and in terms of the badge that you wear on your profile, what do you class yourself as? Are you an FD, CFO?
I'm a head of finance or CFO of an SME.
Okay, so let's put head of finance. Okay, so you're seeing the numbers. So in London, England, we've got more than 12,000 of you so far. So let's put, are there any other words that are appropriate in terms of job titles that you've actually worn on your sort of employment history? So have you been a CFO or an FD or finance manager?
Those are one of the key ones.
Okay, so we'll just go with head of finance for now. Let's assume that you are relatively senior. So we'll go director, we'll go senior. So that helps to take some of the number down, but we're still at quite a high figure here. So let me get rid of England. We'll just make it easier for you to be found by sitting on London. Okay, there's still 5,000 plus. So let's think about this. Now, what I could do is, because of comfort, I could actually choose people that are connected to people that I'm connected to as a way of ring fencing in. Can I ask what your primary sector is that you've operated in predominantly or currently?
Construction, engineering.
So every word I'm putting in is deselecting people. Okay, every single word or preference. We've now gone from 5,000 in London to 51. So the interesting thing is now, just on those words alone, let's see if you come up on the search. Now, the thing with Sales Navigator is you'll see that it's not about who I'm connected to, which is why a decent headhunter will subscribe to something like this. So there's not that many, so I'll just scroll through. And I'd like you to look out for your name, which I don't think we're going to find by the sounds of it. If you spot yourself, do let me know. Okay, so I've got 51 people that I can approach without being aware of you. So just out of curiosity, if you don't mind, do you mind giving me your name so I can find you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, it's Amar, A-M-A-R.
Yeah.
And surname is Shukla, that's S-H-U-K-L-A.
Ah, this one here. Is that your tagline?
Yes.
Okay. So the interesting thing for me is we're second tier. So, I could, through the beauty of LinkedIn, I could take up soft referencing on you. If I was a headhunter, I could look at the people here in common that know me well, and I could say, what's your opinion of Amar? What do you reckon? So the interesting thing for me is I'm thinking, right, why aren't you coming up on that very, very basic search? And the interesting place I'm going to, I've got no interest in your activity yet, because that's irrelevant. It's this bit that becomes the keyword filters of the search. So can I see finance manager here? No. Can I see head of finance here? No. So if you don't align to the underbelly or under the bonnet of the way that LinkedIn really, the way that LinkedIn has grown, the way that it basically, like people, we like to put people in boxes on shelves. It's exactly the same here. This is LinkedIn's. This was one of the first things that LinkedIn created in order to try and build the basis for the engine of LinkedIn. So if you've evolved, and the problem with these in terms of why it gets historically ignored is because initially LinkedIn would reach out to people and say, would you endorse AMAR for this? Yes or no. So if you're finding that you're not being represented, then actually what you need to do is you need to edit your profile. So if you click your profile, you have a prompt here, which I'll show you from my profile, just so you can see where I'm going. So when you bring a profile up, you can get to that particular section. There we go. You can either take add a skill, or you can take a skills quiz. I personally don't see any point in that. Most people I talk to have a pretty good idea on what they can do and what they can't. So the missing words you would add in. But the interesting thing is if you add skills, so I'll just look at mine at the moment. Not there. If I look at these, if I've got any skills that I'm not endorsed for, such as executive, I mean, God knows why that's arrived on there. I've certainly not added it. But funnily enough, I'm not endorsed for it. So the interesting thing is because I'm not endorsed for it, it doesn't come up on the way that LinkedIn works. The only things that get preferential treatment are the ones that actually have a skill endorsement. And before your logical question would be, well, does it matter how many of these I get in terms of, does that influence or skew the pecking order? No, it doesn't. It's the fact that you are endorsed. Where the human factor comes in is that if somebody was looking for example, let's just for argument's sake, say talent acquisition lead, and they look at my profile and they go, oh, he looks talent acquisition-ish. So maybe he's relevant. They could scroll down here and they could go, oh, but he's only been endorsed by 8 people for that. So maybe he's a bit of a rookie on talent acquisition. Yeah, as opposed to maybe another profile where they may have 50 or 60 endorsements. So you need to come up with the words that reflect that, add them in, and then you need to, as a cute way of going to your existing network, and reinvigorating it, what you could do is reach out to, say some of the people in your network and say, hello, Bob, it's been a while since we last spoke. Looking at LinkedIn and our exchange, we've not spoken for a wee while. But actually, I've done a bit of housekeeping on my LinkedIn profile, part of which is, a bit of work on my skills and endorsements to reflect kind of the role I now perform. And if you get a moment, I'd be very gracious and grateful if you would be happy to endorse me for one or more of the following, and state the ones, but not all of them. Just pick 5 or 6, because you don't want to, sort of overly indulge. Otherwise, you'll just say not on your life. And you can say plus any others that you see as relevant, and I'd be happy to reciprocate. So it's an easy way of maintaining 2 things. One is you get LinkedIn working for you better, and it's an easy thing to do. But if you select the people in your network that you seek those endorsements from, it's an easy way to be able to create the opportunity for conversation with those people that you determine as being of higher value. But again, other people look at things like this and they will look at your digital trail and what you share, which is a slightly separate topic. But looking at this very interestingly, a little bit of Facebooky stuff here. That's quite interesting about focus, so again, but people form opinions, and you're right to get a sense of personality across in a LinkedIn profile, but not to the detriment of the focus of the brand you're trying to create. And as I say, I'm going to stay away from highlighting people who fall deeply into that category of definitely misinterpreting LinkedIn, because it wouldn't be fair to expose them on this. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, sure.
Anybody else?
Yes. Hi, Simon. This is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Very insightful. You provided your insight as to providing comfort if you're looking to change industries or sectors, providing comfort to the hiring manager. Can you talk a little bit about if you're willing to take a lesser title? So for example, I'm currently, my most recent role was a CFO, but I'm considering vice president roles. And I recently had a situation where the hiring CFO was reluctant to hire someone as a VP who had previously held a CFO role. How do you have an opinion on what's the strategy on dealing with that?
Well, I think can I just ask, just in terms of aligning to that, was that an advertised role that you'd responded to? So how did that opportunity for that interview come about? What was the...
Yeah, actually the person who vacated the VP role had contacted me and provided my resume to her CFO when she was leaving. Ultimately I found out that he did not want to contact me because she herself had previously been a CFO, and he felt that she burned him by leaving because she left for a CFO role. So I think he believes now that all VPs really aspire to be CFO.
Well, it's quite interesting because it goes back to one of my earlier slides about the problem with people and human behavior, because unfortunately, you know, it's a bit like, and again, I won't mention names, but there are people out there who do job search coaching and career management and all these other iterations, and whether they've had a good experience or a bad, it's easy for everybody to suddenly get tarnished or tainted with the same brush or the same assumptions. But I would say to you is that, you know, I won't name them, but I know a couple of CFOs that are probably better placed behind bars, you know, in terms of what they've done in companies. But that doesn't mean that the entire finance population are consistent with that individual or those individuals I'm thinking about. So the reality is, though, is that clearly this is an individual who, for whatever reason, has formed an opinion. So the starting point for me really is, how much do you know about the role of the person who is leaving in terms of the actual nature of that VP role? And therefore, whilst it may have a different title in terms of the rudiments of the requirements of the role, you know, how starkly different in reality would it in actual fact be? So that would be my first thought. And then the second one is to think about what state or business cycle is that business in, because you tend to find that if you want to go for a lesser role, you're actually better off doing it in a business that is in positive forward-facing mode. Why? Because actually your expertise of being a little bit more weighty, let's say, would actually make the current CFO's role bit easier, because they can kind of face forward knowing that they've got you to rely on, also knowing that as the business grows, the ceiling height grows, and therefore it creates a more sustainable environment for you to remain engaged. If, however, that business was plateaued, perhaps had a few challenges internally that you may or may not have been aware of, and therefore ultimately there's a bit more pressure on the CFO. I mean, you made reference to being a bit burnt or a bit exposed. That would suggest to me that that business was probably either about to undertake or was in the process of things that perhaps would be a little bit unfamiliar with that CFO. And rather than that person embrace your greater competence as an opportunity, they ultimately think, well, hang on, this is the reality of the business. The role is probably quite reporting based. It's probably quite transactional, despite the sell of the advert or whatever it may be. And so they end up making their mind up. So it goes back to psychology again, which is, if you had the opportunity, and I would be honest with yourself, which is, am I really interested in that role? Am I really interested in that business? Yes or no? do I believe from what the VP said to me that this is a CFO that I would be happy to work for and therefore support in terms of their ability to deliver on their role? So to me, the basis of it would start at that point. And then what I would say, depending on your answer there, I would not actually position it as I'm applying for that job. What I would actually do instead is I would say to the CFO, look, you know, I've been presented with an opportunity via the VP who's leaving. I thought there may be opportunity for you and I to have an informational conversation. Why? Because that person spoke very highly of you. And actually, when I look at the business is one that actually interests me. So your starting point becomes comfort around the sense of commonality. And then really the whole argument around interview becomes, well, where are you trying to get to, CFO? That's interesting. Okay. So how much of that is a burden on your plate that you'd rather not have? Okay. Well, that forms the basis of what I can take away from you. So therefore, you come across as supporting their agenda as opposed to, I'm this great CFO, I've had this rich experience. They may perceive naively, not only that there was a fingers burned situation, but they may also perceive the fact that, you know, the market's been a bit challenged in certain sectors, therefore they may view you assumptively as just needing a job rather than this is a considered decision on your part. And therefore the natural instinct from them could be, well, yeah, but as soon as the market picks up, you may be off. So therefore the way that you appease them in that is to not oversell the richness of your prior experience, to almost position to say, well, actually from a work-life choice, maybe I don't want to be the person with my neck ultimately on the block. I'd rather have you have that actually, because where I am right now, I'm interested in the business. The person who left spoke very highly and favorably of you. And I just thought there'd be an opportunity for you and I to speak to see whether or not there's an opportunity for me to support you in your role. So the whole persona is positioned very differently. And that would probably be the tactic I'd take. But equally, there's no singular magic pill here that sort of says do this and everybody is suddenly won over. You know, I'm kind of gauging a reaction on, you know, sort of limited insight, but that would be my instinctive reaction.
Right. Thank you. I think just a follow-up question to that, though, is, and you touched on it, you know, I'm in the later stage of my career and I've been in the #1 slot. And quite frankly, like you said, I'm happy not having my head on the chopping block anymore. And without conveying that I'm, you know, slowing down or that I don't want the responsibility anymore, you know, I'm concerned about not wanting to sound desperate or not giving my all or not being you know, a huge contributor.
Well, what I would, yeah, I think that's an interesting sort of question, because, you know, there's quite a lot of interest from a lot of professionals to sort of say, well, actually, I've come to a point. And actually, for a lot of people, even things like COVID have helped people to sort of reframe and refocus actually what's important, let's say. And some people will absolutely continue to be that corporate animal, and that's absolutely what they want. But then equally, I would argue you've got other people who say, actually, I become a bit more reflective. That doesn't mean your contribution becomes no less valuable to a business. But what you do need to convey, and what I'm picking up here, and the tack I would take, is if you look at the role that immediately supports, so that of a VP, and you look at that in terms of role responsibilities relative to that of a CFO, and you think about your experience, and this ultimately relies on you being honest with yourself, because for me, if you look at the differences or the contrasts in roles, I would argue, and again, I don't know that particular business intimately, but I would argue that the VP is probably going to be a little bit more transactional in tone.
Right.
The VP is going to be a little bit more hands-on with what I would call localized projects, whether they be around systems or MIS or whatever it may be. Right. So they're a little bit more sort of facing down, not just facing up, let's say. Not say that the CFO never looks down, but what I would say to you is that probably a good way to reframe, if that's genuinely where you are, is look at the experience you've done, think about the projects that ultimately you've really got excited by, that you've contributed to, that have kind of meant something to you. Yeah, so blue sky thinking is good to a point, but actually at some point the business needs to deliver something. So focus on what the business delivers and your reaction and contribution to that. That then forms the basis of a rework on your LinkedIn profile so that you can use the stories and the content and your descriptors to lessen the tone of CFO. So the balance of your profile would be less the upward facing blue sky strategy, plans, etc., and maybe, I don't know, again, I've not seen your profile, but you know, you would have been involved probably with financiers, with the banks, and interfacing with all those wonderful things. Whereas as a VP, you won't. So therefore, take those things out, focus on the projects that look a bit more hands-on, a bit more transactional, talk about mentoring team members, you know, bringing on through the part qualifieds, etc. All of those great things that are absolutely valuable to a well-functioning finance function. And once you've repositioned and redressed that, as far as, say, your LinkedIn is concerned, look to get that sense of dilution across to your CV, so that you're skewing the bias of your experience, not your job title, to better reflect and support, not really a downgrade, but a better reflection of where you're trying to get to. And that then becomes the message that you look to share and take to market. And in the same token with the digital trail on LinkedIn, if you're currently inclined to share, I don't know, strategy reports from OC&C and McKinsey about the world of the CFO, then I would say start to temper that one down in terms of the wider visibility, read that to your own leisure, and instead focus on international accounting standards, you know, the new ones that are coming through, the ones that are pending, that actually relate to the day-to-day task that you perform in terms of where you are now wanting to be, and particular areas of it or specialties, because as you become more of a VP, you actually become less broad, a bit more focused in terms of the depth and the detail. So find your sweet spot in those areas and align yourself to that. And I'm pretty sure that will be one route. And the other way of achieving a downgrade in title and responsibility, interestingly enough, is either to go to a much smaller business. That's one way of doing it. But the other way actually is to go into a much bigger business, and you go from, say, a corporate HQ finance role and you look to take on a divisional role instead. So there's two different strategies and tactics to getting you to, you know, to VP or its equivalent, and those are the, you know, those are the insights that more obviously come to mind, you know, at this stage based on the question you've raised.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I appreciate your insight. Thank you. That's
No
helpful.
problem.
Well, Simon, excellent. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, is that, are we near a finish line?
I think we are. An excellent session. You're clearly a pro in this space, Simon. Very, very nice having you